You just got a raise. Your paycheck is bigger than it was last year. You should feel relieved, but you don't. You open your banking app anyway, out of habit, half expecting bad news, even though the number in front of you is objectively better than it's ever been. Your chest tightens a little. Something still feels off. But here's the strange part. The feeling has almost nothing to do with the number on the screen. Something stranger is going on in your brain, and it has a name. Economists have been studying this exact sensation for almost 100 years, and what they found reframes everything you think you know about money and happiness. It isn't about how much you have. It's about how your brain compares what you have to what it expected to have. And once you understand the mechanism underneath that comparison, you'll never look at your own paycheck the same way again. Let's start with the raise itself, because it's the clearest example of the trap. Say your income went up 8% this year. On paper, you're ahead. But prices went up too, so a chunk of that raise disappeared before it ever reached your wallet. Even so, most people don't do that subtraction in real time. Your brain sees a bigger number and briefly files it as more money, even when your actual buying power barely moved. This is called money illusion, a term coined nearly a century ago by the economist Irving Fisher. He noticed that people instinctively think in nominal dollars, the number printed on the paycheck, rather than real dollars, the number adjusted for what those dollars can actually buy. Your brain isn't built to automatically discount for inflation. It's built to react to the number sitting in front of it right now, which means a 10% raise during a decade of rising prices can feel like winning, even when it functions like standing still. So why does it sometimes sting even more than standing still? Why does it feel like losing? That's where the second mechanism comes in, and this one is even stranger. Psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky spent years studying how people evaluate gains and losses, and they found something almost every economics textbook before them had gotten wrong. People don't just want more. People are wired to feel losses roughly twice as intensely as equivalent gains. It's called loss aversion, and it explains why losing $20 feels worse than finding $20 feels good, even though the amount is identical. Now apply that to your cost of living. If groceries, rent, and insurance are rising faster than your paycheck, your brain doesn't register that as I'm gaining less. It registers it as I'm losing ground. And because losses hit roughly twice as hard as equivalent gains, that sensation of falling behind can completely overpower the fact that your raw income number went up. The math says you're ahead. The feeling insists you're behind. Guess which one wins? Here's the part almost nobody talks about. Even if you weren't falling behind at all, even if your raise fully outpaced inflation this year, you'd probably still feel some version of this discomfort, because your brain isn't only comparing your income to prices, it's comparing your life to a reference point that keeps quietly moving underneath you. Psychologists call this a shifting reference point, and it's the backbone of something called the hedonic treadmill, first described by researchers Philip Brickman and Donald Campbell. Their idea was simple and a little unsettling. Humans adapt to almost any level of income or comfort, and once they adapt, that new level quietly becomes the baseline. The raise that felt thrilling in January becomes ordinary by June. Your brain doesn't compare your current life to where you started. It compares your current life to wherever you've already adjusted to. And it keeps demanding more just to produce the same feeling it gave you the first time. This is part of why lottery winners, in study after study, report a burst of happiness that fades within a year or two, settling back near their original baseline. It's the same reason a raise that once would have felt like a windfall now barely registers, because your sense of normal quietly moved the goalpost the moment the money arrived. You didn't get used to being poorer. You got used to being richer, and richer became the floor instead of the ceiling. So the treadmill explains the fading thrill. But what explains the anxiety? What explains checking your account and feeling dread instead of neutral relief. That brings in a third layer. The economist George Katona, one of the founders of behavioral economics, spent decades studying something he called consumer sentiment. Not what people's finances actually looked like on paper, but what people believed about their finances and how that belief shaped their spending, saving, and stress levels. Katona's research found that sentiment often moves independently of the underlying economic data. People can be earning more in real terms and still feel worse because sentiment absorbs signals that have nothing to do with their own paycheck at all. A headline about rising prices, a friend's complaint about rent, the sticker shock of a single expensive grocery run. Your brain treats vivid, recent, emotionally loud information as more important than the slow, quiet truth sitting in your bank statement. And this is where it gets personal. When was the last time you scrolled past a headline about the economy and felt a flicker of dread, even on a day when your own finances were completely fine? That flicker is Katona's sentiment effect, happening in real time. It's also part of why researchers keep pointing to a growing gap between the official cost of living and what people say they actually feel day to day. The number in a government report can look mild and manageable. The number living in your head, built from headlines and receipts and one uniquely bad month, can feel like an emergency. Both numbers are real. They're just measuring two different things. One measures prices, the other measures the story your brain has been quietly assembling about prices. Think about annual benefit adjustments, the kind millions of people receive every year to help fixed incomes keep pace with rising prices. On paper, that adjustment is a raise. It exists specifically to protect buying power. And yet, year after year, the people receiving it report the same complaint. It doesn't feel like enough. Sometimes that's because a narrow cost index doesn't match what a person actually spends money on. But often, it's simpler than that. The adjustment arrives. The treadmill resets almost immediately, and loss aversion does the rest. Any single bill that rose faster than the adjustment gets felt twice as hard as the adjustment itself gets enjoyed. There's a social layer too, and it makes all of this harder to escape on your own. Your brain doesn't just compare your money to your own past. It compares your money to the people around you. A coworker's new car, a friend's vacation, a stranger's complaint about a grocery bill going viral online. Economists call this social comparison, and it means your sense of enough is never calculated in isolation. It's calculated against a constantly shifting crowd, most of whom are quietly doing the exact same anxious math about you. Put all three mechanisms together, and you get the full picture of why a raise doesn't always feel like a raise. Money illusion tricks you into thinking a bigger number is automatically a win. Loss aversion makes any sense of falling behind feel roughly twice as painful as an equivalent gain feels good. And the hedonic treadmill quietly resets your baseline so fast that the win barely gets to enjoy its own moment before it becomes the new normal you're measured against. Picture two people who both get the exact same raise this year. One of them spent the last 12 months quietly watching their savings grow, mostly ignoring the news, comparing their finances only to where they stood last January. The other spent that same year scrolling past cost of living headlines daily, half-consciously comparing every purchase to what things used to cost, and comparing their own progress to friends who seem to be doing better. Same raise, same real buying power, two completely different emotional outcomes. The difference wasn't the money. It was which reference point each brain quietly chose to measure against. That's the uncomfortable part of all this. You don't get to opt out of having a reference point. Your brain will pick one whether you want it to or not. Your past self, your neighbor, a headline, an old price you remember from years ago. The only real choice you get is whether you notice which reference point it picked and whether that reference point is actually a fair one to judge your progress against. None of this means the raise didn't matter. It means your brain was never built to evaluate money the way a spreadsheet does. It was built to compare, to adapt, and to overweight anything that resembles a loss. That machinery kept your ancestors alert to real danger for most of human history. It's not particularly well suited to reading a pay stub calmly on a Tuesday night. So, what do you actually do with all of this? You start by separating two questions your brain keeps quietly merging into one. The first question is, did my real inflation-adjusted buying power go up or down? That's a number you can actually check calmly without emotion attached to it. The second question is, how do I feel about my money right now? That's a mood, shaped by comparison, recent headlines, and a reference point that keeps drifting upward whether you asked it to or not. Those are not the same question. Treating them as the same question is exactly what keeps you anxious even when the actual math is fine. The next time you get a raise, a bonus, or any piece of good financial news, try this. Write down, in one sentence, what your buying power actually did. Not what it felt like, what it did. Then, separately, notice the feeling without editing your actual numbers to match it. Let the feeling be a feeling. Let the number be a number. Most of the financial anxiety people carry lives in the gap between those two things being treated as if they're one and the same thing, because the goalpost is always going to move. Your brain is always going to adapt to whatever arrives and then quietly ask for more, just to feel the way it felt the first time. The question was never really whether you'd feel satisfied with more money. The question is whether you can learn to notice the moment your brain swaps the real number for the feeling and catch it before it does. You just got a raise. This time, before you open the banking app out of habit, ask yourself which question you're actually about to answer. The number or the feeling? Only one of them is going to tell you the truth.